Hello, welcome to Do It Yourself with Wayne. Today, this is our second in a series about aquaponics. In our first series, if you saw that, it was about how we prepared our tanks, which was a 55-gallon plastic barrel. And as I told you in our first video, we're not actually building this system this year. We've had our system for a number of years, and we've taken it apart so we can show you how we built it, although we're not actually building it again, but we're going to show you how we built it. And this is one of the stands that we use to hold two tanks. We're going to show you how we built this stand in this particular video. The things that you need. In my case, we had a bunch of old lumber from a deck that we had torn down, mostly 2x6s and 2x4s, and that's what we used to build the stands with. We just saved some of the better stuff from that project. We put it together with screws, so you need an impact driver. These are deck screws, they're 2 1/4 inches long. You could use nails if you wanted to, it worked just fine. You need a square. I like these tri-squares, they're great little tools. Need a tape measure. We use a circular saw, you can use other kinds of saws. You need a saber saw, jigsaw, whatever you want to call it, because you got to cut an arc for the tank to sit in. And these are outstanding for cutting that kind of a thing. If you would happen to have a bandsaw, it'd be great. I used my jigsaw, worked wonderfully. Pencil and a Sharpie. Now, one thing I'll say about marking tools in a project like this, I don't usually cover this, but most of the time a pencil works great. But one thing I've learned when you're dealing with old lumber, if you mark with a pencil, it's hard to see it. But if you use a black Sharpie, those marks are a lot easier to see, and just makes it easier to follow your lines. So anyway, getting started here, like I said, this is the stand that we built. We made it for 2 tanks wide. We figured we put our 2 tanks on the ground, and we figured how long this needed to be. And in our case, we ended up at 51 inches total. Now, depending on how you want yours set up, it may be a little bit different. You know, these are not hard set dimensions that you got to use. This is just what we used. You know, build your stand to fit your application. But anyway, whatever length you're going to need for your stand, cut 2 of them. Find your center, mark that. Wherever your center's at, mark it. I know mine's there because it's been marked already. And then you want to figure where you're going to put your 2 tanks. Now, what we did was we just set our tanks on top of it. And let me set a tank up there and I'll show you. This is one of our tanks that we prepared before. So that's what we want. The tank that's set like that, the drain line goes here, it comes out, goes back into our pond. But when you got both of them sitting here, you got to have some space between them. So make sure that you keep the valleys that you're going to cut far enough apart that your tanks don't interfere with one another. Okay? Now, in order to cut this arc, that's real easy to do. You take your 2x6, you figure where you want the tank along this 2x6 you've already cut, and mark your 2x6 3 inches up from the bottom. Okay? Now set your tank there so that the bottom of the tank is at that 3-inch mark. Now what you got to do is when you cut this thing, you don't want to cut down so far that this part of the wood is too weak. Okay, leave 3 inches here. That's what I've got. It's worked great for several years. I wouldn't go any thinner than that down here. So when you cut your arc, measure 3 inches here and cut just above it for your arc. So when you set your tank up here, you just take your Sharpie and you do that. Now you got a nice smiley face that you take your jigsaw and you cut that out. You do 2 of them to make these pieces here. The legs are pretty simple, just 2x4s. Make your legs whatever height you want this to be off the ground. Now my legs for my stand, they're 30 inches tall. I went 30 inches because my tanks feed back into my water garden. And the tanks had to be high enough so that the drains would still come over the edge of the water garden and feed back in. So that's why my legs here are 30 inches tall. Yours may not need to be that tall, they may need to be taller, but build it to fit your application. Couple of wood screws here on both ends. I cut some 2x4s to go crossways. Let's see, this thing is, the front and back runners here, they're 20 inches through the outside of both of them, so they're like 19 inches on center. So they're 19 inches wide, 30 inches tall to the top of my legs. And a little bit of bracing here, some bracing at the bottom of your legs, and that gives you a nice sturdy table to put your tanks on. And I warn you, when you're building this, don't cut corners, because these tanks, when they're full of water, particularly if you got stone or gravel or something in them for a media, that gets really heavy. Okay, so don't cut corners on building your stand. Make it good and strong. If you're worried about it, put some extra bracing in there, because these things do get heavy. Now on mine, the one more thing that I did, this is one of my tanks. As you'll see, there's 2x6s around the outside of the tank. When I set this thing up here, it sets like that. Now my other tank sits like so. Now as you can see, there's a little bit of gap here, but there's enough gap for that 2x6 to go around this tank as well. But I cut 2x6s to fit around the outside of the tank. I put screws in through the inside into those 2x6s because I was worried about the outside of these things is bowing out. Okay? Because like I said, there's a lot of weight in these things. And in time, that weight pushing on these barrels, it's going to deform them some. So put 2x6s, just box around the outside of it to give the sides of that tank some support from bowing out. Like I said, I've used these things. I think this will be my 4th year, either 3rd or 4th year of using this system. It's worked great. I know the wood looks bad, but it looked a little better when I built it, but it's still doing the job. But like I said, don't cut corners on this. Build it sturdy, because these things get heavy. So anyway, that's it for this episode of how to build a stand for your aquaponics tanks. And if you find this helpful, please click like and share with your friends if you think it's useful. And to make it easier to find our videos, click subscribe to our channel. It'll make it a lot easier for you to find the rest of our aquaponics videos. And thank you for visiting Do It Yourself with Wayne. We hope you have a great gardening season.